Maternity and Midwifery Forum brings you Matflix, video streaming from maternity experts. All your CPD and revalidation needs met in one place. Our expertly curated box sets are the perfect way to engage with the latest thinking, issue by issue. They make revalidation easy and are the perfect accompaniment to any project or university coursework. In addition to video from expert speakers across maternity and midwifery, there is easily accessible research and links to the latest government policy documents. Our reflective questions at the end are the perfect primer for your revalidation. In the same way the Maternity and Midwifery Forum provides certificates to show that you have attended these festivals, we can provide certificates for those who have consumed the content of a box set and submitted their written answers to the reflective questions provided by our curator, Dr. Jenny Hall. Midwives, maternity professionals and students, do not miss out. Subscribe to Matflix today. Check out the box sets at www.matflix.co.uk.
I'm Nicole Rajan Brown. I'm a proud midwife and I'm proud to be supporting the Maternity and Midwifery Forum, who have helped me to grow, and for creating wonderful professional digital and online resources for midwives across the globe. The Maternity and Midwifery Forum ran their programmes free and online all through COVID. Now we want to grow the catalogue, spread it worldwide and keep it free to use for students and staff. To do this, we have launched a fundraising appeal to help keep all of the 8 wonderful maternity and midwifery festivals free. Keep the weekly Maternity and Midwifery Hour and the weekly newsletters free to midwives and maternity staff. You regularly tell us how much you value these free resources, so do give what you can.
I'll do anything to pull you into the light, 'cause everything will change when you open your eyes. Yeah, so don't you let the sunlight come out without you. Don't you realize?
And good evening and welcome to this week's Maternity and Midwifery Hour. My name's Sue MacDonald and I'm the happy curator for the Maternity and Midwifery Festivals and the Maternity and Midwifery Hour. And it's my pleasure to be chairing this evening's session. This is week 6 of series 14. And we're joined this evening by Anne-Marie Tierney and Fee McLaughlin, and I hope I pronounced that correctly, Fee, both from Safe Lives. And I'm, as always, we like to put them on the spot and invite them to share with us a moment of the week. So, Fee, do you have a lovely moment of the week to share with us?
I do. It's a personal, lovely moment of the week. Yesterday I restarted my Spanish classes. I've been very keen to learn Spanish for a couple of years, and you never get round to it. But I was there in my class yesterday, 6 till 8. So I was very pleased with that, very pleased with myself. My happy moment.
Now, if I was clever, I'd say something Spanish, but all my Spanish has just floated out my brain. That's wonderful. Well done. Now that was on Michael Mosley the other night. So just one thing, the importance of learning things to keep your brain going. You are a beautiful example, Fee. How about Anne Marie? Can you cap that one?
Well, I think so, although it's not quite as highbrow as Fee's example. But I've been thrilled this week because I've got, for the first time in my life, a tumble dryer, which arrived on Monday, and now I know, now that, just coinciding with weather where it's not really appropriate to put your clothes outside, I now have my very own tumble dryer, so everything's coming out very toasty, which is very exciting.
And fluffy.
Fluffy and fluffy and toasty. That's what you need in this this time of year, I think.
Well, now it's going to we're going to have a surge of heat now because we don't need it. But that's a lovely personal thing. Congratulations to both.
Thank you. I'm thrilled for my new arrival. I'm absolutely thrilled.
Wonderful. And thank you for sharing your moments of the week. Now, I'm just going to say a little bit. Now, some of you audience out there from all over the place, and I hope you're going to share where you're from, because that's always really interesting to us talking to you. I know we've got a lot of people from the UK, but I also know we've got a few people from all over the globe. So tell us where you're from. And some of you are old friends, some of you are new friends. So welcome, new friends. For those who don't know, the Maternity and Midwifery Hour was born through COVID-19, the lockdown, that very first lockdown in March 2020, which is 4 years ago now, which is amazing. It's gone, in some ways it's very quick, it's gone quickly, and other ways it hasn't. But we started because we knew we couldn't do anything face to face. We couldn't have study days, conferences, festivals, but we knew there was a desperate need for midwives to link up, and student midwives too, and be able to link up with other practitioners and be able to find out what was happening. Specifically at that time, a lot about COVID-19 and the changes in service and what adaptations people were having to do. And that included all the students whose whole courses were sort of turned upside down at that time. And they managed brilliantly, I have to say. And we had some fabulous presentations at that point about the changes and how adaptable people were being to ensure that women and babies were cared for and the services went on. Anyway, we continued with the maternity hour because it seemed to be very popular. So here we still are. So we're not doing that much now at all about COVID, even though it's still around. It's not the issue that it was, and we're not in lockdown. So we've been delighted over the last couple of years to be able to return to our festivals and our conferences and be able to meet people face to face and make sure that midwives and student midwives are meeting face to face, which is something very special, I think, to midwives. We like to share stories and talk and all the things that you do at a study day and a conference. So we've carried on, and just to say that everything we do is recorded. So if you have a power cut this evening, if you're very unlucky, you'll be able to catch up because everything's recorded. This is recorded, and some of you will be watching this on Thursday or Friday. So if you are, welcome to Thursday or Friday, because I know that the other reason why we do record everything is that if you miss it, you can catch up. And everything's cared for by the lovely Netflix, who've got several little really nice subscriptions at the moment. So you can get a better deal. You can get these lovely box sets with reflective activities and all sorts of things added to a sort of whole thematized session. And there's a lot of offers. So I'm sure that my friend Paul is putting those through, even as I speak on the website on Facebook. So I'll say a big thank you to the midwives, the student midwives, and all the colleagues out there looking after women and babies. You're doing a fab job as always. Just keep on doing what you're doing. And I now move on to the little news feature, and I'm going to only focus on a couple of things because there seems to be a lot in the news, a lot about the American election, 2 weeks off, and it's a close call. So that's a lot in the news at the moment, especially with the some of the things that are happening of people maybe going there and assisting. I don't know. Big thing for me was a new report out for Northern Ireland called Enabling Safe Quality Midwifery Services and Care in Northern Ireland. Now, this isn't quite the right colour. My printer's a bit weird at the moment, so it's coming out a strange colour. It should be a sort of bluey colour. This is the summary report, but it's got quite a big report, about 300 pages long, and this has been led by Professor Mary Renfrew. We all know Mary Renfrew. She led the Lancet series in midwifery, but this report was commissioned by the Department of Health in Northern Ireland to look at safety of maternal and neonatal care and services, and it included a look at freestanding midwifery-led units, which included looking at staffing, experience and education that was needed for safe services. Also a review of body mass index and shoulder dystocia, and looking at consistency of service across maternity services. So a really important report. And I know that Mary had it was a whole process. And if any of you interested in the whole process of how really good, strong research project goes on, you only have to read how it processed. And it's beautifully presented, so that's always worth to read. So just some of the recommendations are needing a shared strategic vision for quality maternity and newborn care, needing reconfigured relationships with women, families and communities, they need to be at the heart of care, as they always should be anyway. Obviously, the need for consistent and evidence-informed practice for maternity and neonatal services, and improving safety for women and babies, most important. And that included clinical, cultural, psychological, and equity. And we know that's a theme that's come. This has been going on for a few years. These themes are really important. Also, she's suggested a change to work culture and investment in community as well as hospital services. Better approach to education and training. So that those are all in that summary. If you haven't got time to read the whole report, this is about 9 pages. Really good. If you're in Northern Ireland, I suggest you start reading the whole thing and trying to digest it. It's not difficult to read. It's just quite large. So don't set your printer to print until you've got the settings correct, just in case. You might end up with more than you bargained for. Now, also, I'm going to move now on to the Royal College of Midwives Awards. Huge congratulations to all the people that won. Now, all these things, I should have said right at the beginning, these are resources I've put on the resources sheet, so you can just check out this for yourself. But just to highlight, big congratulations to the nominated and winners of the RCM Awards. And one of the people was Julie Sanders and her team for excellence in midwifery research. And of course, Julia led the pool study, which we heard about in the Wales and Southwest Festival. Also, Robin Dalton, United Lincolnshire Hospitals, and she got an excellence in midwifery for education and learning from the NMC, who supported that award. Jemima Ward, Medway Council, and she won the award for excellence in midwifery public health. And Alison Colwood, University of Surrey, for equity, diversity and inclusion, sponsored by Diverse Cymru and Health Observatory. And I dare say that isn't proper pronunciation of the Welsh word. I'm sorry, I'm trying to learn that one. And I also want to say huge congratulations to Mervy Jokinen and Janet File, who are currently employed by the RCM, both awarded honorary RCM fellowships and both richly deserved. You'll know Mervy as the president of the European Midwives Association, does a lot of work across Europe, and Janet File has done an enormous amount on female genital mutilation prevention and care. So well done to them. Now, I know that now I usually say October is such and such a month, and actually this is very relevant. It's Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And I've said before that there are several materials available via Baby Buddy and Safe Lives, and we're very lucky to have 2 colleagues from Safe Lives this evening to really bring these resources to life. And because our discussion tonight is going to centre on domestic abuse and in particular how midwives can respond, what you can do, and identifying women who might be at risk of abuse, I need to say a trigger warning, because some of you will have been involved with caring for people with domestic abuse and violence. Some of you actually may be survivors of that. So do take care of yourself. And if you're listening and you're finding it too difficult, just maybe take a few moments out. We've got some helplines available on the resources, but you need to look after yourself first and foremost, because it is a very difficult topic we're going to talk about. And I'm hoping that many of you will find this really helpful in knowing how to signpost women and care for them even better, not have to do everything yourself, because I know that's a worry for midwives as well. So firstly, I'm delighted to introduce Anne-Marie Tierney. She's a lead trainer and assessor for Safe Lives, and she started out in the violence against women and girls sector in 2009, working as an independent domestic violence and sexual violence advocate. She oversaw a support service for victims of trafficking in the Hampshire area. And she worked with NGOs to provide exit services and trauma-based interventions for women and children who have been trafficked. So she's got a huge history and experience in this whole area. She also worked for the Crown Prosecution Service in the National Victim and Witness Governance, and she's now working as part of the Safe Lives training team. She's the programme lead for all training relating to children and young people and risk assessment. And I'm delighted that she's with us this evening. So Anne-Marie, the screen is now yours. Welcome.
I've really privileged to be able to speak to you all today, and especially with it being Domestic Abuse Awareness Month. So thank you for having me and my colleague Fee. And what I'm going to be talking to you about is the Domestic Abuse Act of 2021. And one of the main things that we got from that act is the statutory definition of domestic abuse. So really our starting point is thinking about our current understanding of domestic abuse and what the emerging priorities are in terms of risk and what kind of behaviours we are looking to identify. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Safe Lives first of all. There you can go onto our website and get access to a lot of our research and resources, and there are some links to our website and social media embedded in my presentation. But really the thing that I really feel passionate about, and I think all of the staff at Safe Lives do, is that as an organisation, a domestic abuse charity, a second tier charity, which means we don't provide the frontline services ourselves, but we endeavour to produce best practice guidelines through our training team, through our practice team and our research and evaluation team to advise others, to advise frontline workers across different sectors, including health, police, housing, etc., on how we can really transform the response to domestic abuse for survivors. Our ethos is, or our goal is, to end domestic abuse for everyone and for good. So we really do believe strongly that domestic abuse is not inevitable, and we don't have to accept it as an inevitable fact of life for anyone, and that through robust intervention and prevention, we can reduce and eradicate the rates of domestic abuse. And we're all part of that solution. So that's kind of what we feel very strongly about. It's not just specialist domestic abuse workers, but everyone who may come into contact with victim survivors has a role to play, being part of that jigsaw of a really empathic, trauma-informed and risk-led response, which will reduce adverse outcomes in terms of domestic abuse, reduce rates of domestic homicide, reduce rates of serious injury and harm, and eventually reduce rates of domestic abuse in general, which is what we want. Part of our strategy is that we believe in seeing the whole picture, a whole picture response to domestic abuse. So when we think about any individual who has experienced domestic abuse, that isn't the whole part of their person. They are part of a family, a community. That community is part of society. And therefore, the messages that they may be getting, the places that they may be seeking support around domestic abuse come from various different parts of their life. So they have a family that they're part of, but that family is part of a community, and societal responses are also really important for empowering people to reach forward and reach in and get support. Funnily enough, we're on a bit of a cusp of slightly changing our strategy, because it's that time of year. So this one strategy finishes, another strategy has to begin, and we are building on this. So still very much the whole picture, but what we're now looking to emphasise about, and I can't give too much away lest my manager tell me off, but I can tell you that we're now thinking about what type of response are victim survivors entitled to, what rights do they have to expect from the services that they're accessing, what should services look at providing. So moving on to really empowering survivors to think, actually, this is what you are entitled to when you look and seek for support, and that's what we want to support people to be able to do. So I'm going to that's an easy segue for me into talking about the Domestic Abuse Act of 2021. It's one of the really big kind of landmark pieces of legislation that we've had for quite a long time in terms of domestic abuse. And I think the way that leads on from our strategy is that it really did seek to eradicate some of the loopholes that there were around survivors accessing support in various different sectors, and really addressing some of the gaps that there have been in terms of legislation when we're looking at supporting survivors. So it has quite a few different facets to it. It's a huge piece of legislation, and it really is an umbrella term for lots of separate pieces of legislation that here is brought in. I could do a whole day on the DA Act, but we're not going to do a whole day on that, unfortunately. But there are lots of changes, such as non-fatal strangulation being made an offence within its own right, controlling and coercive behaviour extended so that it includes post-separation abuse. Local authorities now expected to have a perpetrator strategy, so not just focusing all of our scrutiny and all of our action required on survivors, but actually what kind of support or response is there to perpetrators in local authorities on statutory footing. It also established the role of a domestic abuse commissioner as well, who's there to oversee the implementation of various parts of this legislation. But the bit that I'm focusing on for the purposes of our presentation is the enshrining of a statutory definition of domestic abuse. So believe it or not, we didn't actually have a statutory definition of domestic abuse prior to the DA Act. There was Home Office guidance as to what the definition of domestic abuse should include, but there wasn't kind of one definition that we would all now adopt in our services when we're understanding domestic abuse. So the Domestic Abuse Act categorised the different categories of domestic abuse that there might be. And what I think is really, really important about this, and I'm bringing up the categories now, is that it really reflects a modern understanding of domestic abuse that isn't contingent on only the violence, physical abuse and or sexual abuse. When I started off in the sector in 2009, we did use the term domestic violence. And although even as a domestic violence advisor, I would have been aware of lots of these other non-violent types of domestic abuse, the response across the sector was very much built around an understanding that it would domestic abuse includes physical abuse. What we now know is that there are lots of other manifestations of abuse that are really important for us as professionals to be able to acknowledge and identify. And they can be trickier to identify potentially, but as professionals, upskilling ourselves to be able to pick up on where there might be controlling and coercive behaviour, recognising that economic and financial abuse is also a form of abuse, psychological, emotional and other types of abuse are really, really key as well. Not all domestic abuse relationships may not have any physical abuse at all, but what we know from our research into risk and where the real risk lies within domestic abuse, the risk of serious injury, harm on the victim, the survivors and their children, is that it doesn't all lie with just serious physical abuse, that controlling and coercive behaviour is also a really high risk indicator. So it's absolutely vital that as professionals we understand what it is, and that we might be able to identify what some of those signs and symptoms or indicators might be. For the definition to apply, both parties must be aged 16 or over. It's interesting to note this was reduced a number of years ago, about 5 years ago, from 18 to 16, to recognise the research we have as well that suggests that the age group of 16 to 24 are at the highest risk of domestic abuse than any other age group. That risk increases where there is a young person who is pregnant as well. So where we have 16 to 19-year-olds who are pregnant, that is a very high risk age group, unfortunately, for domestic abuse. So now the age in the definition reflects that risk. And for domestic abuse to be made out, we would be looking at that taking place between intimate partners, ex-partners or family members. And I think it's really key to note the ex-partners as well, and recognising that post-separation abuse is a thing. It can be very high risk, the same as when people are still in a relationship. And sometimes that can get lost as well. So the controlling and coercive behaviour legislation that was introduced in 2015 did not recognise that you could coercively control somebody post-separation. It was only under the DA Act of 2021 that that's been rectified and that's been changed. So really, really important part to have that enshrined within the definition. And for our purposes as well, another really key part of this is that Part 1 of the Act provides that a child who sees or hears domestic abuse is a victim of domestic abuse in their own right. So we used to use terms like children witness domestic abuse in the home. That vernacular has now changed. So we would say that children who are in a home where there is domestic abuse are experiencing that within their own right. They are a victim within their own right, because we know that the impact of that on children and young people is really, really significant. Controlling and coercive behaviour, as I say, is really, really important as a key risk factor. It was criminalised in December 2015 to reflect the fact that research shows that it is one of the highest risk indicators in a relationship. What I would say that coercive behaviour is how you get the control. So the two come together, that through coercive behaviour such as threats, humiliation, intimidation, or that's how perpetrators are able to maintain control. And that control can include somebody being deprived of their autonomy, their independence, or the thought that they might be able to escape that situation. Now, if you add pregnancy into that situation as an additional vulnerability, or perhaps something that another barrier to extricating themselves from that abusive relationship, we can see that there are ways, which my colleague Fee is going to talk about, that as in midwifery, we might be in a unique place to be able to identify and respond and have those conversations. Everyone normally gasps when I show them this infographic because it's quite busy. But what this shows is how controlling and coercive behaviour, where that is present within a relationship, can insidiously impact and overlap with lots of other types of abuse as well. So we would be thinking about, when we're risk assessing, when we're having conversations about somebody's relationship, about the risk they're in, thinking about how, if there is that coercive and controlling behaviour that we know is present in a relationship, what are the other ways in which that may present itself or manifest? So is psychological or emotional abuse used as part of that controlling and coercive behaviour? If there is coercive and controlling behaviour, when we think about how somebody might be able to consent to the sexual element of their relationship, that might be another place where those two things overlap in terms of our understanding. And I think it's really important as well, for completeness, that we're also thinking, when we're thinking about the other ways that domestic abuse may manifest itself, that we're also thinking about honour-based abuse as well, which will be something potentially that you might come across when you are working with your patients, with people who are going through pregnancy. Again, we've moved away from the term honour-based violence to be honour-based abuse, to reflect the same kind of trajectory that we had with domestic violence, which is that honour-based abuse is any abuse that is motivated by the feeling that someone has brought shame or dishonor upon their family or upon their community, and therefore that shame or dishonor must be restored, and that can take place via punitive or violent or abusive acts. I think Fee's going to talk about responding in a health setting, and how there might be sort of unique ways to identify things like female genital mutilation, for example, and when you're in a health setting, being one of the kind of universal services that people encounter. One of the other things that is a really high priority to be able to identify and respond to in terms of understanding the risk that it poses is non-fatal strangulation. That has been made an offence in its own right under the Domestic Abuse Act of 2021. And as we know from research, it is a very high risk indicator. So where someone is experiencing any form of strangulation or choking in the relationship, we would really want to probe more, understand more about how that is happening, and make sure somebody is referred on for appropriate support. I'm not going to read all of those statistics out, but I do want to pick out the one that researchers suggested that for those that experience incidents of suffocation or strangulation, 9% are pregnant at the time. And when we think about what some of the impacts that might have health-wise, and therefore how that might filter through to impact an unborn child as well, the risk is really, really significant. And that can coincide with coercive control as well, that research has shown that non-fatal strangulation is a common element in coercive control, which results in victims and survivors becoming more compliant in a relationship. It is a red flag. It's important for assessing future dangerousness. It's important for us to, at least as frontline workers, be in a position to identify and therefore refer people on, give them the right information and refer them on to appropriate support services. Again, I don't want to read out all of these statistics on the PowerPoint slide. There was a multitude of statistics I could have picked. I have a whole range of research with various stats that we can pick out about domestic abuse and pregnancy. The most common statistic that you'll hear, which we would endorse as Safe Lives, is that around 30% of high-risk domestic abuse either starts or significantly escalates during pregnancy. So we know pregnancy is not a barrier for domestic abuse happening, that women are not necessarily safe when they're pregnant from domestic abuse. One of the key things I want to pick out from this before I end for my part, because this is where you come in, is that 33% of people who'd experienced domestic abuse during pregnancy said they didn't know where to begin to look for help. And feeling ashamed has been found to be one of the most significant barriers to accessing help. That's where professionals can come in, asking the questions, identifying, passing on information and signposting to where people can go for specialist support would eradicate that 33% that don't know where to go for help. If we talk about it more, people will know where to go for help. And if we can help reduce the stigma, we know that will increase disclosures, and that ultimately that's going to keep more people safe. That's all from me in terms of my slides. So I'm going to pass back to Sue.
Huge thanks, Anne-Marie. That's really good overview, and I think it's very useful. Some of those facts will have been known by our audience, some won't be. So some of them quite horrifying, especially talking about the strangulation, and also there's a catalyst. I mean, we know that it's a catalyst, but a 30-odd% is quite a shocking statistic to kind of see in reality. So thank you so much, Anne-Marie. Now, if you have questions for Anne-Marie, you can put them in the chat box now. We're going to move now to our next speaker, and I'm delighted to introduce Fee McLaughlin, who's a practice consultant to Safe Lives, and she's worked in acute and community health care services for over 10 years. She's worked in frontline domestic abuse services within the NHS as a senior safeguarding practitioner, and worked directly with survivors and community domestic abuse services with specific aims to continue bridging the gaps between acute health services and community domestic abuse services. She currently works within the practice team at Safe Lives, working on several projects that aim to embed survivor voice into the design and delivery of policies and services to improve and transform existing domestic abuse programs. So welcome, Fee. The screen is now yours.
Thank you so much, Sue. Thank you so much for the intro. Like as you said, my name's Fee McLaughlin, and I'm a practice consultant here with Safe Lives. I'm going to be providing a bit of a whistle-stop tour of a project that I've recently been involved in, which is called the REVA project, and that looks at evaluating models of health-based independent domestic violence advisor provision within maternity services. So it's a bit of a mouthful. But again, just to echo what has been said before, please hold yourselves well with the presentation I'll be doing. And if you need to step out and take a moment for yourselves, I'm not going very deeply into the nuances of domestic abuse, but there's one or two examples. So just want you to hold that with yourselves. So we know that health IDVA provision is really only an asset to NHS trusts, and health IDVAs are really an integral part of the multi-agency response to domestic abuse, and really are in a great position to provide support to both victim survivors of domestic abuse within a healthcare setting, and also, like has been mentioned before, to staff survivors. When I worked clinically as a safeguarding practitioner in the acute health setting, a fair amount of my caseload was from staff victim survivors of domestic abuse. So providing support to the staff is a large part of health IDVA's role as well. And also very importantly is providing that overview training about domestic abuse, raising domestic abuse awareness to trust staff, and giving very practical support on how to support victim survivors when disclosures come about. So specifically about REVA. So REVA is a study that's actually led by the research team at King's College London, and the project aims to identify learning from NHS trusts that already have a health IDVA programme, and then to evaluate the impact of the implementation activities of the health-based IDVA provision, specifically looking at maternity services. So what's gone really well, what kind of things have the trust been doing to kind of get a health IDVA embedded in the service. And the team's been working with 5 NHS trusts through England, and that's kind of from the north of England to the south, who already have a health IDVA in post. And from some of the data collected, aiming to provide that practical advice on successfully embedding health IDVAs within trusts. So that's an overview of the project in itself. So how are Safe Lives involved? So we at the Safe Lives have been able to provide quite specialist support to this study as an independent domestic abuse charity. So we've kind of done that through observing meetings around domestic abuse, health IDVA services in the trust, and trying to support that senior trust level engagement with issues of domestic abuse and the IDVA model, and really importantly, having very open and honest conversations around how the health IDVA model has been embedded, and about how domestic abuse is, how awareness of domestic abuse is raised and within the trusts. And then supporting sites kind of more practically to implement IDVA models in line with some national guidance that we have. So I'd recommend, if you're unaware of the whole health model or the health pathfinder documents and toolkit, I'd really recommend having a look at them. They can be accessed on the Safe Lives website. At the end of this, there's a couple of resources that you can have a look through. What we've also done is looked at specific case studies and case reviews of IDVA responses in each site, and then generated conversation and feedback around those cases. We also conducted domestic abuse systems mapping in each area, and this kind of consisted of mapping referral routes and pathways. So how referrals, the pathway kind of went from inpatient acute domestic abuse to like the referral to a community pathway for the patient, for the victim survivor, for the children or the unborn, and then for also we looked a little bit at perpetrator services, which there's always a very limited amount of. sort of nationally, or people who had concerns about their own behaviour within their intimate relationships. And we kind of looked at those to look at identify local areas for improvement. Something really interesting we were able to do within this project, which I think the participants found really helpful, was facilitated a community of practice, which was sort of approximately 6 to 8 weeks over a year, Teams meetings, 2 hours, something like that. And that allowed participants of the study from different trusts to come together, sort of share learning, have a sounding board for barriers within their trusts, celebrate successes and things like that. It was quite interesting because a couple of the times there were spikes in referrals from services sort of from the north of England and the south of England, which we were able to discuss. And also in a couple of the sessions, we were able to provide sort of a brief overview of training from internal Safe Life staff. So Anne-Marie mentioned before non-fatal strangulation. So that had come up in a couple of referrals for the health IDVA across the acute services, so across maternity and across A&E. It wasn't just limited to A&E, so we did a training session around that. We also did a bit of a session around MARAC, so Multi-Agency Risk Assessment Conference, which is a meeting in the community for people at very high risk of domestic abuse, and discuss kind of barriers to that, anything that was kind of going on within MARAC referrals. And also, because of what participants had mentioned in previous sessions, we did a little training on older person domestic abuse. That was something that was coming up in a lot of the community of practices, that people felt quite unsure about where to go. So we did a bit of training on that. And then to kind of round it off our involvement, we did a workshop at the end of this project, where we focused on celebrating the successes of the health IDVA provision, because not every trust has one. So it is really incredible for the trusts who have one. And then we encouraged discussion around barriers and future plans for the service. And this here is just a little graphic that I quite like, that shows how kind of this all has been facilitated after a lot of chatting from me. So kind of how the conversations we had, case reviews we looked at, and observations kind of came together in the workshop to allow for like a co-created improvement plan, and those discussions sort of to be had. So moving on to best practice. So several best practice themes emerged from the work on this project specifically for maternity services that I just wanted to go through, and hopefully you'll find this useful if there's any practical bits that you could take on into your own practice or your own learning. So one I'm going to really bang on about, and Anne-Marie's already kind of touched on it, is routine inquiry questions. So yourselves as midwives, midwifery staff, maternity staff, midwifery students, you're in an incredibly valuable position to respond to domestic abuse. So maternity services, you're really one of the only services where pregnant women are expected to have multiple appointments, sort of attend drop-ins at children's centres, attend outpatient clinics, maybe community midwives, you're going to pop and see women at home. So there's really ample opportunity for routine inquiry about domestic abuse, safety at home questions to be asked each and every appointment, obviously as long as it's safe, and for you to kind of use your professional curiosity to kind of just dig and find out how these women are feeling, and are they feeling safe at home. Secondly, I'd really encourage yourselves to ensure you're aware of, within your trust, of the safeguarding team. If you've got a domestic abuse specialist team, or you may well have a health IDVA within your own trust, and just really make sure that you're aware of how to contact the team, sort of what the referrals pathways are, and then familiarise yourself with them. I know when I was working clinically, the staff I spoke to, you sort of receive a disclosure and there's a certain amount of terror, understandably, and then the feedback I got was them thinking, I've received this now, what on earth do I do with this? It's all on me. And that's very not the case. So receiving disclosure can be very frightening and distressing for yourselves as healthcare practitioners, but it's about being aware of what you can do with that information next. That can be that empowering and confidence building, because we know that yourselves as midwives, midwifery staff, you'll receive disclosures. If you haven't already within your practice, you will. So just really where to seek advice if you have that niggling worry about a patient is really powerful, and allows you to kind of to receive those disclosures. And also if there's a domestic abuse champion within your service that you can talk to, just so you're kind of aware of these people. So when you receive disclosure, you know kind of where you need to be going. Next that's come up as best practice in this project is training. I know you're all incredibly busy. I can remember when I was working on the wards, you don't really even have time to go to the toilet, never mind fill out large assessment forms, but really trying to make sure that you can attend all domestic abuse training that's offered within your trust. And this can be formal stuff. Sometimes there's usually a fair amount about domestic abuse in your level 3 safeguarding training, which I imagine you'll be doing. So it can be formally as part of your CPD, of your NMC revalidation kind of stuff. Or from the project, what we found and what the health advisors I spoke to found most useful is when they were providing that very informal training. So when a staff member, they were walking on maternity and one of the midwives or the maternity assistants came up and said, can I talk to you about something? And then you're kind of getting a group together for that very informal lunchtime kind of training or talking through cases, which they found really beneficial. Also, can you invite a domestic abuse, one of the team or one of the safeguarding team to your morning huddle or handover? Because then you kind of you know who the people are, you know their face, you know you can speak to them, and that I think from the people I've spoken to in this project reduces a bit of that anxiety about making the phone call and that kind of thing. And for those of you that work in the community, could you invite a team member to speak at a team meeting or provide a little bit of training, that kind of thing. And then along those training lines, I'd recommend as well you're aware of the domestic abuse risk assessments that are used within your trust. So the trust that I've worked with, they would often do risk assessment training. So that might be what you'll use in the trust. If you're in Merseyside, it might be the Merit. But it's very likely that your domestic abuse safeguarding team or health advisor, whoever you have in your trust, they're working a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. That's the whole teams I've been speaking to. That's what they're working. So having an awareness of how to complete the risk assessment that's used within your trust can really increase your confidence in completing these referrals out of hours and that kind of thing. So I said I would go on again. So again, just the case routine inquiry. So that's kind of one of the main takeaways that, if anything, from my talk here is just routine inquiry. So I wanted to keep this slide here. So there's really huge support for normalising these routine inquiry questions on a woman's every attendance to maternity appointment or even on a phone call, if it's safe, inpatient in the community. So an example that we had from the project was one of a lady who was attending maternity services. It was an acute service, so she was coming into the maternity ward almost weekly, and she was reporting pain and reduced fetal movement with her unborn. Every time she was examined, she was well in herself, scanned, the baby was well, no problems. And as it turned out, she was actually coming into the department for that feeling of safety and to get out of her house. And because she was pregnant, her abusive partner didn't question these appointments. And even because if she had to do a urine sample, blood sample, you'd usually go in by yourself. And it was really once that she was asked these routine safety at home questions that she then made a disclosure that she was concerned about her partner's behaviour and felt unsafe. And she was able to get the support and these repeated attendances stopped. So I don't know if that rings familiar in anyone listening. And as you can see from this quote here, from a staff participant who we spoke to with this project, a woman who came through our service last year, and she was asked at booking about domestic abuse, and she said, no, everything's fine. But she resolved to tell the next person who asked because she thought, yeah, they want to know. And then no one asked again. So a missed opportunity there to provide support to that person, to that woman and her baby. So the impact of routine inquiry can really be astronomical. A woman may not choose to disclose when the question's initially asked, but feel supported enough that it was even asked in the first place to make a disclosure next time. So it's really important that she has the opportunity to do so. And there's just some quotes here. I won't kind of talk all of them, but a lot of them kind of resonate with what Anne-Marie has said, how the changes in legislation, the changes about from domestic violence to domestic abuse, and it really kind of highlights the impact of training needed. So there's a quote there that domestic abuse is a black eye. If you haven't got a black eye, it must be an argument in the family. And that was said in the Pathfinder consultation. And then something else, my ex-partner was abusive towards me in front of the midwife and nothing was done or said. So these are just kind of little quotes that we have that highlight really the importance of training. And then just one last one that I thought kind of end on a little bit of a brighter note. So I was glad the midwife asked me, you suffer in silence unless you know of services, and I wouldn't have mentioned it. So I was glad she was asked, and that came directly from a survivor talking about her experience in midwifery. And then finally, I've got some resources here where you can find on Safe Lives, the Pathfinder toolkit, some information about Whole Health London. And there's also the following article at the top there, which is for more information on the REVA project in and of itself. You can access the article there and about IDVAs in maternity services. So that's available for review now. And that's everything from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Fee and Anne-Marie. It's really I'm feeling a little bit breathless. A lot of information and a lot of things that are quite shocking for all of us. And I think one of the things that I was sort of thinking is you can learn, and probably any students who are watching, and you might want anyone who's watching who disagrees with me or agrees could say this. But I wonder, sometimes you learn the stuff, the theory of it, and the kind of routine questioning, and you might get into doing that. And it's when you then meet a woman who then responds, and that's when you really learn what you've got to do. And that's the bit that's really scary, because and you were giving a hint of that, because both of you actually were doing that, because there is a feeling when that first happens, oh my God, what can I do with this information? Who, what, where, and all the stuff that you've learned in your brain kind of goes somewhere else. So having a resource that you can go to, I mean, would you have you got a recommendation for a really quick, apart from going to your own, well, I suppose I'm almost giving my own answer now, going to your local safeguarding people? Or do you have something that would help people feel more confident when meeting that situation?
I think it's probably the best, because certain services do things slightly differently. Yeah. I think it's usually best just to kind of prepare yourself as much as possible. You're not going to be prepared in the moment. It is frightening. But just to know within your trust, who can you go to, or within whoever you're working with, who can you go to speak about that and receive advice, because it's can be slightly different from trust to trust. So I think that.
Oh, well, absolutely. We'll leave you were talking about different models being used just in that few minutes, so that could be clear. I mean, Anne-Marie, have you got anything you should add to that?
I think I could offer some words of comfort to people that yes, it is a daunting prospect to ask people about domestic abuse, but what research directly with survivors indicates is that they're not expecting you to have all of the answers right there and then, and to be able to just solve the issue there and then. What is really important to think about is not just sort of what you say and what you can offer, but how you do it. So Fee mentioned the importance of training, and I think that I would add, as well as domestic abuse training, kind of knowing what a trauma-informed response is. So knowing the kind of how to embody a kind of empathic and trauma-informed response. So even if you're a little bit lost for words at the time, or you're not in, you need to get your brain to remember what the process is. But sometimes it's just about how you carry yourself, and you remind someone that, okay, I'm really pleased that you felt that you were able to disclose that to me. And being able to kind of validate and believe somebody is the first sort of thing on the checklist to be able to give a really good response. One client that I worked with when I was in IDVA said, I'm not made of glass. I don't know why people are so worried about talking to me about this. I just want to be treated with dignity, with respect, and to have what I'm saying believed and validated. And kind of, you know, we can work out the best pathway to support from there, but it kind of starts with building that rapport.
And that's a really, I mean, that the listening, the validating, that's a really good issue. The other thing I was aware of is that often women are very ashamed, which is weird because they shouldn't be, but they are. So that kind of underpins the way that we have to respond, and that the respect and the validation would help, but also being, I think it's, and actually I don't think it's a big problem, because I think we can be quite warm towards the woman, because even if she doesn't want to leave her partner, because I know that's something that often is leveled at women. Well, she's not leaving him. Why isn't she leaving? You know, it might be, there's, as you were pointing out, the woman in the family and the community, it's a lot more complex than just leaving, because you have to be ready, don't you, and have everything set up if that's what you choose to do.
We do know that separation is actually the riskiest time for a survivor of domestic abuse. So any kind of decision to leave, that risk does need to be managed. So conversations around leaving, you know, shouldn't be saying this is definitely what you need to do right now. This is sort of managed by domestic abuse practitioners in a kind of specialist way. But yeah, I think that the being able to realize that a lot of perpetrators will put somebody off disclosing, so say no one will believe you, and if they do, no one's going to do anything about it, or they'll think you're a bad parent, a bad mother, if for, you know, even being in this situation. And anything that practitioners can do to break that myth and undermine that narrative for someone can be really, really powerful. And that's where that belief and validation comes in, and saying, you know, it's not your fault that this has happened to you. It doesn't, you know, make you a bad parent, and there is support available should you need it.
That's really good. And I think if you're working alongside the safeguarding team and hearing that would help also you as a person too. We have a question or two. Thank you to the audience. We've got Zara. Hi, Zara. Zara says, is there support for midwives who are domestic abuse survivors? And that's a really good question, because of course a lot of midwives are women and will be in that situation. So I don't know who. Fee, would you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's any specific for midwives. I know that there was the health advisors who I spoke to in the domestic abuse services interest who I spoke to had a lot of staff survivors they supported, and it was very much making sure that that was incredibly confidential. All of that was really incredibly confidential and taken very seriously. So that's something that I've come across a lot of the time working with staff survivors, professional survivors. I'm not sure if there's anything specific for midwives. There may well be survivor networks specifically for midwives, or health professional staff out there. I'm not sure if you know anything else, Anne-Marie.
I concur with Fee that I don't think there's a specific agency or service for midwives. I think I would point people as well back to the fact that their employer should have a domestic abuse policy in place at work. So whatever trust that is, or hospital, or however sort of you're deployed or employed, there should be a domestic abuse policy. And that can be helpful to know things like what is available via our employee assistance program. So they might be able to signpost there. being able to have that assurance, as Fee said, that things are discreet and confidential, and also in a domestic abuse policy from an employer, it might set out things you're entitled to, like time off to attend appointments. So actually, if the only time you're free to speak to a IDVA is when you're at work, because that's when you've got that space away from the perpetrator, it might be that a supportive workplace is able to facilitate you being able to access those appointments, and that can be really key as well.
It's grand. Thank you. That's very good. Thank you. Now we've got a comment, and this is Katie. Hi, Katie. And Katie says, I find it hard when you pick up on behaviours of a family member, but can ask several times, but they just reply, everything's fine. I always think about these women and their safety, even months later. Well, that's a very strong comment, Katie. Absolutely. And I don't know where you kind of put that, because I guess that comes down to readiness, doesn't it, to share that. And I was thinking as Fee was talking, that especially when you were talking about the woman, that little quote from the woman who said, nobody ever asked me again.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, well, this is where, if you have a continuity of care model where you'll have either one or two midwives that you're more likely to be able to kind of reveal to that person that you're in having that, and they'll probably pick it up quicker too, because of that closer relationship, which I mean, that's quite key, really, I think, in terms of care, because this is very much about feeling safe. And I guess your safety with your family, whoever the family member is or the perpetrator is kind of on that dangerous level that your trust in everybody's affected. That must be the case, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess, like Anne-Marie said, if people experiencing domestic abuse have been told by the perpetrator no one's going to believe you, then that's the added shame as well. I know a couple of women I was working with would say that they didn't want to disclose because if they had children under 18 or pregnant, social care referrals might need to be put in, and that was the initial fear and shame of, oh, social workers, they're going to take my kids away. So that's still a narrative that's really, I know there's been a lot of work to try and dispel that as a myth, because I think social workers try and work incredibly hard as much as possible to keep families together as safely as possible, but that's still something that's circulating in kind of an initial raw fear from that person that I don't want to go take my children.
And I guess the perpetrators will know the buttons to press, won't they? They'll know the things that can be really hurtful and painful, and taking your child away is probably the worst, because all mothers will protect their babies and children before themselves, actually, won't they? Gosh, that's very thought-provoking. And I have to say, this hour's gone really quickly. And I always say this hour goes the fastest of all of the hours in the week. And I want to say a big thank you to Fee and Anne-Marie for being with us this evening. I would recommend you have a look at some of these sites, because there's incredibly useful information, and some of it, you might not want to read it all at once because there's a lot, but do go to it. I've just had a question that's just flown through on my screen, and I do beg your pardon, audience. I should have said that's why I'm keeping on looking away, but I do one last question. Can I do one last question? And that's no, there's two questions. You have to stop. Two questions. Zara has come back for a second go, and she said, is domestic abuse training included in preceptorship, more in depth in university, or does this depend on the trust? Good question. And I'm not sure the answer's going to be easy.
I'm not sure either of us would know that.
I don't think even in level 3 safeguarding training, once you started the trust, and I think there's even, I think in the trust I used to work in, it was like any band 5 needed qualified staff would do level 3 safeguarding training. There's domestic abuse within that, but I don't think it's sort of mandatory training in and of itself. So we can't, it's not something that trusts have to put a separate part as a mandatory training, although I don't want to say, but I think it would be really useful if it was. But it being the level 3 safeguarding training, I'm not too sure about preceptorship, if I'm honest. I know we would sometimes have student nurses shadow the safeguarding team when I worked in safeguarding, so that's a good avenue. And I'm not too sure about university. I imagine it would be, but I don't know how in depth they go, honestly.
I mean, I know for social care training, it's actually a very small part of their overall degree. So if that tallies out with midwifery as well, it's certainly not, I would imagine, as prominent as Fee and I would, and Safe Lives would like to be, because the rates and the prevalence are so high that it is going to form a part of your casework, and a part of the frontline work that you do. So it is important to get that training.
Yeah. I think, I mean, and it lies within probably the trust strategy for domestic abuse as well, I would imagine. And we've got now there's everyone's making lots of comments now. This is only 1 hour, not 2 hours. So Ngozi from Leeds says, if the woman is not engaging and missing antenatal appointments, will it be wise for the midwife to visit the woman's home? Good question again, Ngozi.
That's a very good question. I think there's a bit more information that will be needed. I don't think it's a question we can really answer safely at the moment. I think in that respect, if there's concerns, I would speak to sort of your team lead. I would contact your safeguarding team, kind of if there's anyone else known within the family, if there's any history and that kind of thing. If it'd be even safe for you to visit that woman at home, you're not quite sure of the history. I think a little bit more digging and escalating up and getting a bit more history. It might well be, but I don't think we could say definitively go for it for this one. I think there's more information that would need to be found.
You might need to go with a colleague.
I would suggest.
Okay, and I've got 2 more comments, and this is how fantastic our audience are. They're already answering questions. So Nicola Jenkins, hi Nicola, says, that's what I've found. I've been a continuity midwife 3 years and found women are more likely to open up. Absolutely fabulous. And then Katie says, I've practiced 10 years and it's a brief part in safeguarding at my trust, no specialist training. And then Sue Warwick, coming thick and fast. Sue Warwick, at the trust I worked at, we did a yearly mandatory training by the safeguarding team at level 3. This was not just for midwifery, for the multidisciplinary team. That sounds fantastic. I think we'll finish on that fantastic spot. Now, I'm going to say another thank you to Fee and Anne-Marie for this evening, because you've got everyone's thinking now and coming up with things. So I think we might have to have our colleagues back again, and I hope they'll come back anyway. Thank you to Paul, who's been flying through the questions through to me, and thank you to you all for really engaging so brilliantly this evening. It's been fantastic. Now, next week we've got another difficult topic, which is bullying in midwifery, and we've got Amanda Burley and Deb Hughes joining us. Don't forget to book this Friday. There's a lovely free event, Maternity Spotlight, with Sheena Byram from All for Maternity. Everybody knows Sheena. And Marie Louise from Modern Midwife. Everybody knows Marie Louise also. And they're doing promoting health and wellbeing for pregnant women and those who care for them. And that's from 12 to 1 on Friday. And because everything's recorded, if you register, you can get it later if you haven't got time, if you're working. Also, Midwifery Education and Student Experience Festival is on the 13th of November, and these are going to run alongside each other. You can meet everybody, come to Leicester face-to-face or access online, and you can get your university, if you're in a university, to link in, and that's fantastic. So it's almost like being at the festival, not quite as good, but almost. And then the Scottish Festival on the 26th of November is in Edinburgh. So if you want a little trip north of the border, we'll be there, and that'll be fantastic. Superb programme. And in the meantime, I'll say another thank you to Fee and Anne-Marie, and a big thank you to those of you who came this evening. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you next week. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
I'll do anything to pull you into the light, 'cause everything will change when you open your eyes. Yeah. So don't you let the sunlight go by without you. Don't you realize how lucky we are? Open up your heart.
Maternity and Midwifery Forum brings you Matflix, video streaming from maternity experts. All your CPD and revalidation needs met in one place. Our expertly curated box sets are the perfect way to engage with the latest thinking, issue by issue. They make revalidation easy and are the perfect accompaniment to any project or university coursework. In addition to video from expert speakers across maternity and midwifery, there is easily accessible research and links to the latest government policy documents. Our reflective questions at the end are the perfect primer for your revalidation. In the same way the Maternity and Midwifery Forum provides certificates to show that you have attended these festivals, we can provide certificates for those who have consumed the content of a box set and submitted their written answers to the reflective questions provided by our curator, Dr. Jenny Hall. Midwives, maternity professionals and students, do not miss out. Subscribe to Matflix today. Check out the box sets at www.matflix.co.uk.
I'm Nicole Rajan Brown. I'm a proud midwife and I'm proud to be supporting the Maternity and Midwifery Forum, who have helped me to grow and for creating wonderful professional digital and online resources for midwives across the globe. The Maternity and Midwifery Forum ran their programs free and online all through COVID. Now we want to grow the catalogue, spread it worldwide and keep it free to use for students and staff. To do this, we have launched a fundraising appeal to help keep all of the 8 wonderful maternity and midwifery festivals free. Keep the weekly Maternity and Midwifery Hour and the weekly newsletters free to midwives and maternity staff. You regularly tell us how much you value these free resources, so do give what you can.